Yeah, morning everybody. Thank you for joining us. We'll just give it another minute or two because the numbers of people coming in are increasing now. So I'll just wait a couple of minutes for them to join, and then we'll get cracked on. I think we're about there now. So yeah, thank you very much for joining us this morning. We really appreciate you spending the time to just quickly dip into what we're hoping to teach you, or sort of, widen your knowledge a bit more about how you can maximise your field performance using precision. First of all, we've just got a couple of little housekeeping bits. You'll be pleased to know we've not got any fire alarm drills planned. So if you hear an alarm, it's probably your own, so you better get straight out. We've muted everybody automatically, just for the number of people that are on the call. But if you do have any questions or anything like that, then feel free to pop them in the chat box on the right-hand side. We'll catch up at the end with questions if there's time, and failing that, we will email you back later on today, hopefully, the answers to any questions. And finally, we are recording this, so anybody that, if you've got to dip out halfway through or what have you, or anyone that can't make it, then this is going to be available to view online as well afterwards. So we'll make sure that you've all got access to that. Right, we'll get cracked on. So yeah, maximising field performance. And we're just going to glance over the couple of topics that we've got today. As I say, it's a really, really quick overview. We know it's a busy time of year, so we didn't want to sort of tie you down into too longer time in the office. But we've just got 4 key points. We're just going to cover a little bit about soil variation, and then I'm going to hand over to Rich, who's going to talk about nutrient sampling. And then I'm just going to do a very quick slide on variable rate seed. And then at the end, Rich is going to cover the new elm scheme. So yeah, we'll crack on. Basis points are available. We've just got one basis point and one NROSO point available. So there, if you want to jot down the numbers there, I'll just leave that up for a couple of seconds. But don't worry if you don't get a chance to write it down, because we've got it popping up at the end as well. So soil variation. This is something that we've focused on quite a lot at Agrivistra, and we're really seeing some large benefits from. Historic knowledge on your own farm or your customers' farms is brilliant, but just adding that extra level of detail to assist with that historic knowledge that you've already got really just adds a bit of fine-tuning and really helps you push to that next level. The other thing is making a digital copy of what you've got in your own head is game-changing in terms of, it's okay thinking, oh, well, I know in that area of the field, it gets a little bit heavier or a little bit lighter, but having that in an actual digital form, knowing exactly where to pinpoint a soil sample, for example, or, to change rates on the seeding side of things, it does make a big difference. And ultimately, the more information that you've got, the more informed decision that you're going to be able to make at the end of it. So whether or not that's your own knowledge on that field in the first place, and you've just very agriculturally written it down onto a soil zone on an online platform, or whether you've had something like variation scanning done, or if you're looking at yield mapping, things like that, you can focus rather than just looking at one aspect. You can bring multiple layers in to make a proper decision. And then leading on to that, as I've just mentioned lightly, targeted approach to pushing field performance properly. So again, rather than just saying, oh, well, the bottom end of the field always does well and the top end always does poor, you've got a physical zone then to treat properly. So rather than just saying the bottom, on a digital copy, you've got X, 0.4 of a hectare here and 0.5 of a hectare up the top that does differently. So it's pushing those areas and making sure you're identifying them properly. And then one of the key ways to measure soil variation, we have 2 methods. One is using satellite imagery and the other from an EM scanner. Both options are £12 a hectare. So again, £12 a hectare isn't really that much in the grand scheme of things. You've only got to pay for it once, and then that data is with you forever then. So you can, multiply that up over the course of your lifetime to make full use of that information. And the satellite option that I just briefly talked about then, that's not just taking into account soil variation, but also a couple of other elements as well. So rather than just focus on where the soil type differs in terms of, clay versus sand or whatever, or silt loam, or it's also taking into account a bit of NDVI imagery as well. So it's looking at the overall field productivity, putting that into the equation as well. And then it's also looking at a bit of soil moisture too. So obviously, establishment-wise, soil moisture is a critical step. So by encompassing all three of those aspects, we're getting a really, really detailed, high accurate image of where your field's performing well and poorly. And then obviously we can build on that, whether it's variable rate seed, soil sampling, as Rich will talk about at the end, to do with the new elm scheme. There's a multitude of different things that we can use this map for. So I'm just going to pass on to Rich now.
As Steve mentioned, we're focusing a lot on soil variation these days, but in soil sampling, it's worth still mentioning generic grid mapping, which to this day carries on being the reliable starting place of most growers that we deal with when entering into precision agriculture. So still a really great place to start. But moving on to using the soil variation data, again from either satellite or scanning, we prefer to do this now and help dictate soil sampling zones. So some nutrients actually follow trends within different soil types. So that's why we prefer to use this now. We'll use your variation maps to either take one sample per zone, which can reduce costs while also creating a really useful nutrient map, or we can split each of those zones into 1 hectare sections and sample that way. So much more intensive. By splitting the zones into hectare sections, we ensure that the sample is only taken over one soil type instead of hectare gridding, where the hectare grid might actually lie over 2 or 3 different soil types and just give an average for that area. So this is the next level of precision, really, which can provide similar savings on inputs to grid mapping, but with an increased level of accuracy of application, which is going to be ever more important going forwards. And then on field composite samples, regarding these, your one sample per field samples, variation maps can either help the sampler achieve an even more representative sample of the field by taking cores of soil from each soil type to get a really good average for the field. Or if the field is consistently performing poorly, we can use variation maps along with a look at, say, biomass data maps to see if poor performing areas and soil type variation match up. And then we can place high spec, broad spectrum extra Solvita samples in these areas to investigate what the limiting factor might be. And these Solvita samples, which you've probably heard of by now, which give a biological, physical and chemical look at the soil, these are our best indicator at the moment for what might be causing your problems in the field. And when we put all this together, it gives you the potential for saving on input. So at the end of the day, maximizing yield, matching nutrition to crop demand and saving money on inputs is what we're mainly looking to do here. And we've seen smaller and larger growers alike achieve savings of around £20 a hectare per year after grid mapping, which is great in itself, but this will also be key to unlocking ELM's SFI payments going forwards, which I'll sort of come on to in a minute after Steve's next slide. So I'll pass you back to Steve now.
So yeah, as we've discussed, you've got your your variation scan in the first place that I spoke about first, and then Rich has just covered over a bit more about how to utilise those zones for soil sampling. So now the other, another key aspect and a very quick way to save some money or to try and increase yield, should I say more, is using variable rate seed. So as technology moves forward, the use of variable rate has become a lot more prevalent in the agricultural industry. So we're seeing a lot more people being able to try variable rate seed, and with it being a very, very cheap, easy thing to sort of dip your toe in, it's often quite a good, successful one to try with in the first instance. So once you've got your variation map, that creates your base layer to build on. So essentially that's your foundation. And then year on year, once you've done your first year, for instance, you can look at a yield map or some satellite imagery, see what's worked and what hasn't, and then tailor it. So every year you can consistently tailor that initial base layer. And the more images you're adding in and the more data you're adding in, the more accurate you're making it year on year. And typically we can see a yield increase on average of between 3 and 5%. So when you're looking at the cost of actually creating a variable rate seed map, if you've already got capabilities in the field or on farm, the cost of doing this is very, very minimal. So an average of 3 to 5% is actually a reasonable chunk for not a lot of input yourself. And obviously you're pushing the field performance in the areas that you're specifically targeting based on the variation map. So then to follow on and just complement what Rich has just said about soil sampling, if we're soil sampling those zones and then also treating those zones separately for seed as well, we're really, really giving a lot of detail into those specific regions to try and maximise what's coming out of those areas. The team ourselves, so we consist of 4 people. So there's Graham in the east, Andy up in Scotland, Rich over in the west, and myself in the Yorkshire North East team. So between us, we have a lot of knowledge with all different aspects of equipment, both tractor related and implement wise. So between us, we've got a wealth of knowledge and good contacts in the industry. So if you've got any questions, or if you're wondering whether you're variable rate capable or not, just pick up the phone to any one of us and we'll happily talk you through it and try and help you out. And then finally, once you've got your data, so if you've got a variation scan or some satellite imagery, or you get some nutrient data, as Rich has just discussed, you've got the ability to be able to create, download, and view all of your information through our online portal, Insight. So this is a really nice, quick, easy way to just log on very quickly and see all of your farm's data in one place. And then going forwards year on year, we're always optimizing and looking to push for new things. So the development on that is consistently rolling forward. So all the way through, you'll see improved tweaks. And so if you've got anything that you think's lacking, then just let us know. And again, we can add it to the development list. We're racing through this, Rich. We're only 12 minutes in. So yeah, I'm just going to pass over to Rich, who's going to talk a bit about elms.
So I think the first point worth noting with elms and SFI is the ever-evolving sort of structure of it all at the moment. None of us are entirely sure what it's going to what the rules are going to be, but currently it's looking as if the intermediate and advanced levels of SFI payments, which are up to £54 and £74 a hectare respectively, will be accessible only if growers undertake nutrient mapping. And in terms of the level of intensiveness of that mapping, 1 hectare nutrient mapping will be accepted, and we're keeping an eye on whether zone mapping on larger than 1 hectare sections will be accepted. And that's something that we'll keep you updated with, and we'll sort of add to our arsenal if it comes about. But utilising this data to assess true performance of the fields, we need to be using this data that you might already have access to. So yield data off the combines, a few years worth of yield data can show up reoccurring patches within fields that can indicate problems that need looking into. So a great place to start for data that you already own. You don't have to pay anything to access. You could just send it to us. We can clean up the data and then again put it on Insight for you to look at and depict some zones. When you combine this with biomass data, you can really see these patches in greater detail, but also look at whether the differing biomass levels start occurring at either establishment or later on in the growing in the season. And again, if these same patches have occurred over years and years repeatedly, then we can do something about it. But in terms of SFI and payments and stewardship, when you combine these layers of data, you can start to build a picture of where on the farm might be better suited to being placed into a scheme. This might provide a greater income than being cropped. And then, like Steve touched on with Insight, you can use the online portal to draw and measure out these areas and keep a record of them, so you know exactly what sort of hectareage you're putting into a scheme, and you can work out how much you get from that scheme as opposed to having it cropped in the usual manner. That's about it, really. One last point I'd say is, we're making this point in pretty much every presentation we give at the moment, is when you're doing your composite samples for your fields, your one sample per field, we really need to be taking a measurement of carbon and organic matter. These will be crucial going forwards with payments, and especially, you know, locking in carbon and sequestration. So if you're not already opting for a broad spectrum extra or a broad spectrum extra Soll Vita, which include these as a standard, we need to be adding carbon and organic matter measurements to your standard PKMG pH samples, just so we can start getting a baseline and then see how we improve it going forward. But yeah, like I said at the start of this slide, Elms is an ever-evolving beast, and we'll be keeping an eye on it and making sure we're up to date with, you know, offering the right advice to you at the right time. That is pretty much it. Like you say, Steve, we've sailed through that fairly quickly. Have we got a couple of questions in the chat? So you've put this in, Steve. Would you ever Soll Vita test per 1 hectare? I mean, you could, but it's going to be horrendously expensive. You're much better placing a Soll Vita sample on a per field basis, or once you've done a scanning map, you might be able to depict a really heavy or a really light area of the field, which performs poorly every year, just from, you know, your visual assessment or from biomass maps or yield maps. Then we can place a Soll Vita test within that section of the field, or within that section and the good performing section, compare them, and then see how we can change tactics in the poor area to really change the outlook of that field.
Perfect. Cheers, Rich. Another quick question is, can you tell me more about the carbon mapping that I saw on Twitter? Is that sampled per zone or another way? So this is using satellite imagery. So a company that we're dealing with offers high resolution satellite imagery. So they have got some really clever algorithms that are looking at the soil and the crop performance, and they're giving us target places to go and soil sample to manually. So this map basically is a high accuracy carbon map, and then based on what that image is telling us, we then go and take some ground truth samples from that field, send those off to the lab, and then calibrate the lab samples back up to the high resolution map. And that's how we're getting an accurate image of what's going on carbon wise. So yeah, look out on social media for a bit more information about that, and feel free to inquire if you're wanting pricing and to work out a bit more about it.
Then we've got a question from John here. It's just come in about the typical zone size when scanning. So once we've scanned with the EM scanner especially, we can adjust zone sizes to just to simplify the maps. So a zone map might come in with 7, 9, 12 zones in, but the variation between 2 or 3 of those zones might not be a huge amount in terms of soil texture. So we can amalgamate those, and say a 3 hectare field had 12 zones in it, we might be able to change that into just 2 zones, a heavy and a light, and go sampling that way. But when it comes down to Elms, we'll have to keep an eye on whether it still needs to be 1 sample per hectare within those zones to unlock the intermediate and advanced levels, or whether we're going to be able to just do it by soil type, which may be more than 1 hectare blocks.
Perfect. Cheers. Just one more question before we head off. How often do you get satellite images these days? That's by Chris. So basically, when satellite imagery first came into agriculture, we were lucky if we were getting one decent image a month. It was horrific. But as technologies move forwards, the satellite companies are taking a lot more images. So we can be seeing sort of 2 and 3 images a week. Granted, if there's heavy cloud, then obviously that can interfere with some of those images. So it might not be 2 or 3 images that are very clear that week. But generally, 2 or 3 images per week, and then you've got maybe 1 or 2 with cloud. So ultimately, you can pick through, and you've got something reasonable within that time scale. Right.
Yeah, it looks like no other questions are coming in, Steve. So I think we've covered that all.
Yeah, thank you very much for your time again, everybody. I'll just leave our information details at the end there, and feel free to give us a bit of feedback of how you found today, or get in contact if you'd like any more information. Thank you very much, Rich, for the time that you've just put in there.
No, cheers, Steve. Cheers, everyone. We'll catch you later.
Yeah, thank you. Bye-bye.